I was
I
standing
told
at the
you this
bank
would happen,
counter
Mother.
when
Why
my
can't
own
you ever
daughter
listen?
looked the clerk
Now
straight in
look
the
at the
eye
mess you've
and
made, and
said,
I have to fix it again.
"She has no money." For a moment, everything went silent. I could feel people turning, watching me, like I was some helpless old woman who had lost control of her life. Mr. Collins glanced at me with quiet pity, already deciding who to believe. But I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled. Because in that exact moment, I knew something my daughter didn't. And in just a few minutes, everything she thought she knew about me was about to shatter. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And before we go further, don't forget to like and subscribe. I have a feeling this story might hit closer to home than you expect. My name is Victoria Reed, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of woman people don't really notice. Not because I wasn't there, but because I never made noise. After my husband, Richard Reed, passed away 8 years ago, the house became unbearably quiet. The kind of quiet that sits in your chest at night and reminds you that no one is coming home anymore. For a while, I thought I might disappear into that silence. But life doesn't stop just because your heart breaks. So I kept going. I stayed in the same modest house we bought 35 years ago in a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. I didn't renovate it, didn't upgrade anything. The same curtains hung by the windows. The same worn wooden tables still stood in the kitchen. People would walk in and think nothing had changed in decades. Maybe they were right. I lived simply. I cooked my own meals. I clipped coupons sometimes, not because I had to, but because I was used to it. I didn't travel. I didn't buy expensive clothes. I didn't go out much. And over time, people started assuming things about me, especially my daughter. Emily Carter. She used to be the center of my world. When she was little, she would run into my arms every afternoon after school, her backpack half open, her hair messy, talking a mile a minute about everything that happened that day. I remember packing her lunches, staying up late, helping with homework, working extra shifts, just to make sure she never felt like she had less than other kids. Back then, she would look at me like I was everything. But somewhere along the way, that look changed. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started after she married Daniel. Daniel Carter had a way of speaking that always sounded confident, like he knew exactly how the world worked, and everyone else was just trying to catch up. He worked in real estate, always talking about investments, profits, opportunities. Every conversation with him somehow circled back to money. At first, I thought it was just his personality. Then I started noticing the way Emily changed around him. She began to ask different kinds of questions. Not, "How are you doing, Mom? But why don't you sell the house?" Not, "Do you need anything? But what exactly did Dad leave you?" There was always something underneath her tone, something calculating. The first time she came over after Richard passed, she walked through the house slowly, her eyes scanning everything, not with nostalgia, but with evaluation. "How much do you think this place is worth now?" she asked casually, running her fingers along the kitchen counter. I remember pausing, a dish still in my hands. "It's not for sale," I said gently. She shrugged. "I'm just saying, it's kind of outdated, Mom." Outdated? That word stayed with me longer than I expected. After that, her visits became less frequent. Weeks turned into months. Phone calls became shorter. Sometimes she wouldn't pick up at all. But when she did call, it was almost always about something financial. "Have you thought about downsizing? You shouldn't be managing everything by yourself. Do you even know what your accounts are doing?" It wasn't concern. It was doubt. And Daniel, he never even tried to hide it. One Thanksgiving, he sat at my dining table, and said, "You know, Victoria, money doesn't grow just sitting in a savings account. You've got to be smart about these things. I smiled politely. I managed just fine. He leaned back in his chair, exchanging a quick glance with Emily. I'm sure you think you do. That was the moment I realized something had shifted completely. They didn't see me as capable anymore. They saw me as outdated, irrelevant, a woman from another time who didn't understand how the world worked. And maybe that was my fault, because I never corrected them. I never told Emily about the nights I spent learning how to manage investments after her father died. I never told her about the small decisions I made, the risks I took, the discipline I kept. I never told her because I wanted to see something. I wanted to know if my daughter would still love me if she believed I had nothing. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that she was busy, that life had gotten in the way. But deep down, I knew better. People show you who they are when they think you have nothing to offer them. And over the years, Emily showed me more than I ever wanted to see. She stopped visiting unless there was a reason. She stopped asking about my life. She stopped seeing me. To her, I became something small, something fragile, something unnecessary. And yet, despite all of that, I never confronted her. I never argued. I never raised my voice. Because I was waiting for the moment when the truth would matter. And standing there in that bank, hearing her say those words, "She has no money," I realized that moment had finally arrived. The bank suddenly felt smaller than it had just minutes ago. Or maybe it was just me standing there realizing that my own daughter had reduced me to nothing in front of strangers. Emily didn't even look at me when she said it. "She has no money?" She repeated, her voice steady, confident, almost rehearsed. I watched Mr. Collins shift his weight behind the counter. His expression had changed. It was subtle, but I had lived long enough to recognize it instantly. Pity. Not respect, not neutrality. Pity. "Well," he said, carefully clearing his throat, "if that's the case, ma'am, we do need to understand the purpose of this visit." Emily stepped forward before I could respond. "Yes, of course," she said quickly. "That's exactly why we're here, Bime." I let that word settle in my chest for a moment. Not she, not my mother, we. As if I were no longer an individual standing on my own 2 feet, but a responsibility she had already claimed. "She's been having some difficulty managing her finances," Emily continued, lowering her voice slightly, though not enough to stop the nearby customers from listening. "I think it would be best if I had access to her account. Just to help." Help. Daniel stood just behind her, one hand casually resting in his pocket, the other holding his phone. He didn't speak, but his presence said everything. Every now and then, he would nod slightly, as if silently confirming every word Emily said. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. He avoided my eyes. That more than anything told me the truth. This wasn't concern. This was strategy. Mr. Collins nodded again, now fully engaged in their version of the story. "Do you have any documentation?" he asked. Emily smiled, just slightly. The kind of smile that appears when someone knows they're about to win. "Yes," she said, reaching into her handbag. I came prepared. Of course she did. She pulled out a neatly organized folder and placed it on the counter. I could see several documents inside, tab signatures, printed pages. This wasn't something she decided this morning. This had been planned. Carefully, thoughtfully. Without me. "She signed some preliminary paperwork a while back," Emily added, sliding the papers toward Mr. Collins. "But I think we need to finalize everything today." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "A while back?" I asked calmly. Emily finally looked at me. For just a second. "Oh, you probably don't remember," she said lightly. "It was during that appointment we had last year. You said you wanted me to help you if anything ever got complicated. That wasn't what I said. Not even close. But I didn't correct her. Not yet. Mr. Collins began flipping through the documents, his brow furrowing slightly as he scanned each page. I could hear the faint rustle of paper, the quiet tapping of his pen against the counter. The room felt heavy, like something was about to break, but no one knew exactly when. I see, he murmured. This appears to be a limited power of attorney request. Yes, Emily said quickly. Exactly. Limited. Just enough for me to make sure everything is handled properly. Properly? I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Properly according to whom? There was a long pause. Mr. Collins looked up at me. Mrs. Reed, he said gently, do you understand what your daughter is requesting? I met his eyes. I do, I replied. And are you comfortable with that arrangement? Emily turned toward me fully now, her expression tightening just slightly. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment where I was supposed to nod, to agree, to confirm everything she had already told him, to prove her right. Behind her, Daniel straightened a little, watching closely. The silence stretched longer than expected. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, waiting, judging, deciding. And then I smiled. Not a forced smile, not a weak one. A calm, steady smile. The kind that comes from knowing something no one else does. I think I said softly, before we discuss what I'm comfortable with, we should verify something first. Mr. Collins blinked. I'm sorry. My accounts, I continued. I'd like you to check them. Emily let out a small, impatient sigh. Mom, that's not necessary, she said quickly. We already know. I'd still like him to check, I interrupted gently. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, stronger than she expected. For a brief second, Emily looked at me as if she didn't quite recognize who I was. That moment didn't last long. She recovered quickly, folding her arms. Fine, she said. Go ahead. Her tone carried a quiet confidence, because in her mind this was just a formality, a step that would confirm everything she already believed. Mr. Collins hesitated, glancing between the two of us. All right, he said slowly. I can pull up your account information. May I see your ID, Mrs. Reed? I reached into my purse and handed it to him. My hands were steady, completely steady. He typed something into his computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The screen reflected faintly in his glasses as he leaned closer, reading. For a few seconds, nothing happened, just silence. Then his expression changed. It was subtle at first, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a pause in his breathing. He leaned in closer to the screen, typed again, checked something else. Behind me, I heard someone shift in their seat. Even the air felt like it had stopped moving. Emily noticed it too. What is it? She asked, her voice tightening just a little. Mr. Collins didn't answer immediately. Instead, he clicked again, scrolled, then stopped. And in that moment, I knew. Not because I saw the screen, but because I had seen that exact look before. The look people get when their assumptions begin to fall apart. Is there a problem? Daniel finally spoke, his tone sharper now. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. I just need to verify something, he said. Emily frowned. Verify what? He didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the phone beside him. I'm going to call my manager, he said. That was the moment everything shifted. Emily's confidence cracked, just slightly. Her brows pulled together. Why would you need your manager? She asked. Mr. Collins looked at her, then back at me. And this time, there was no pity in his eyes, only uncertainty. And something else. respect trying to find its way back. Because he said carefully, this account isn't exactly what it appears to be. And for the first time since we walked into that bank, Emily had no idea what was happening. The moment Mr. Collins reached for the phone, something invisible in the room snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unmistakable. Emily felt it too. "What do you mean it's not what it appears to be?" she asked, her voice sharper now, the confidence she carried just moments ago beginning to crack at the edges. Mr. Collins didn't answer immediately. He dialed a number, his fingers slightly less steady than before. I watched him carefully, noticing the subtle shift in his posture. He was no longer in control of the situation, and that unsettled him. "Hi, Karen," he said into the phone. "Yes, I need you to come to the front desk. There's something you should take a look at." A pause. "Yes. I'll wait." He hung up slowly. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Daniel stepped forward, now his calm facade starting to slip. "Is there some kind of problem with the system?" he asked, trying to sound composed, but failing to hide the tension in his jaw. Mr. Collins glanced at him briefly. "I'd prefer to wait for my manager before discussing details." Details. That word lingered in the air like a warning. Emily crossed her arms tightly. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "We came here to handle something simple." I tilted my head slightly, studying her face. Simple. That's what she thought this was. A routine visit. A quick transfer of control. A quiet confirmation that her mother was exactly who she believed her to be. Small. Dependent. Irrelevant. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. A few minutes later, a woman in her early 50s approached us from the back office. Her name tag read, Karen Mitchell. She carried herself with quiet authority, her eyes sharp and observant. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, her tone professional but firm. Mr. Collins gestured toward the screen. "Could you take a look at Mrs. Reed's accounts?" Karen stepped beside him, leaning slightly to read the monitor. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then it changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. Her lips parted slightly, and then she straightened. "Mrs. Reed," she said, turning to me with a completely different tone than anyone else had used so far. "Could you please confirm your full name and date of birth?" I did. Clearly, calmly. She nodded once, then turned back to the computer, typing quickly. Emily let out an impatient breath. "Can someone please explain what's going on?" she demanded. Karen didn't look at her. Just a moment. Another pause, another series of clicks, and then Karen did something that caught everyone off guard. She logged into a second system, not the standard one Mr. Collins had been using. This one required an additional password, a higher level of access. I noticed the way Mr. Collins stepped back slightly, giving her space. Even he didn't have full visibility into what she was doing. Daniel noticed it too. "What is that?" he asked. Karen ignored the question. Her eyes scanned the screen, moving from one section to another. Then she exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in realization. "Well," she said quietly, almost to herself, "that explains it." Emily's patience finally snapped. "Explains what?" she insisted. "This is my mother's account. There shouldn't be anything complicated about it." Karen turned to her, and for the first time, there was something in her expression that made Emily take a small step back. Not anger, not judgment, authority. Actually, Karen said calmly, "This is far from a simple account." The room seemed to shrink around us. I could feel the attention of every person nearby. No one was pretending not to listen anymore. Emily frowned deeply. "I don't understand." Karen nodded slightly. "That is becoming very clear." The words were polite, but the meaning wasn't. Daniel stepped in again, his voice firmer now. Look, we're just trying to help her manage her finances. If there's something unusual, we should be informed. Karen finally looked at him directly. And who are you? Her son-in-law? He replied quickly. Karen gave a small nod, then shifted her attention back to me. Mrs. Reed, she said, before I proceed, I need to confirm, have you authorized anyone else to access or manage your accounts? The question hung in the air like a test. Emily turned toward me instantly. This was her moment again, her chance to regain control. Mom, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You remember we talked about this. I'm just trying to make things easier for you. Easier. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the tension in her shoulders, at the expectation in her eyes, at the assumption that I would say yes, that I would follow the script she had already written for me. For a brief second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who trusted me, the one who didn't measure love in numbers. And then that image disappeared, replaced by the woman standing in front of me now, a stranger wearing my daughter's face. I turned back to Karen. No, I said simply, I have not authorized anyone. The words landed harder than anything else that had been said so far. Emily's face went pale. What? She whispered. Karen nodded, once her expression sharpening. Thank you. That clarifies things. She turned back to the computer, typing quickly again. This account, she continued, now speaking with precise professionalism, is linked to multiple financial instruments, including long-term investments, managed portfolios, and restricted access funds. Each word felt like a stone dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward. Emily blinked rapidly. I don't understand, she said again, but this time her voice lacked any confidence. Daniel frowned. What kind of funds? He asked. Karen looked at him briefly, the kind that require verification beyond standard account access. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Mr. Collins shifted beside her, clearly just as surprised as everyone else. I didn't see any of this on the primary account screen, he admitted. Karen nodded. You wouldn't. It's not visible at that level. Emily slowly turned her head toward me, her eyes searching, confused, uncertain. Mom, she said quietly, what is she talking about? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. Let the weight of her own words, she has no money, settle back onto her shoulders. Then I met her gaze, and for the first time since we walked into that bank, I didn't look small. I said gently, we're about to find out. No one spoke. Not immediately. It was as if the room itself needed a moment to process what had just been said. Multiple financial instruments, managed portfolios, restricted access funds. Each phrase echoed louder in the silence than any argument ever could. Emily's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Daniel, on the other hand, recovered faster. What exactly does that mean? He asked, his voice controlled, but noticeably tighter than before. Karen didn't rush her answer. She turned the monitor slightly, not enough for them to see everything, but enough to confirm that what she was looking at was very real. It means, she said calmly, that Mrs. Reed's financial profile is far more complex than a standard checking or savings account. Emily blinked. That doesn't make any sense, she said quietly. I could hear it in her voice now. Not confidence, not certainty, confusion. Real, unfiltered confusion. Because everything she believed about me was starting to fall apart. Karen continued, her tone steady, professional. There are multiple accounts linked under Mrs. Reed's name. Some are standard, others are not. Daniel stepped closer. "What kind of accounts are not standard?" he pressed. Karen gave him a measured look. "The kind that are typically associated with long-term asset management, private investments, and trust structures." That word trust hit harder than the others. I saw it instantly. Emily's shoulders stiffened. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Because now this wasn't just about money. It was about something bigger, something they hadn't considered. "You're saying," Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "there's a trust involved." Karen didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned back to me. "Mrs. Reed, would you like me to proceed with a full disclosure of your account structure in the presence of these individuals?" The question was deliberate, careful, respectful. For the first time since we walked into that bank, I was the one being asked for permission. Not managed, not spoken over, not dismissed. Emily turned toward me again, her eyes searching desperately now. "Mom, what is she talking about?" she asked, her voice softer, almost fragile. I held her gaze, and for a moment, I said nothing, because this right here was the moment I had waited for. Not to embarrass her, not to punish her, but to let her see, to truly see, the difference between what she assumed and what was real. "Yes," I said, finally turning back to Karen. "You may proceed." Karen nodded once. Then she turned slightly, positioning herself so that both Mr. Collins and I could see the screen clearly, while Emily and Daniel remained just out of view. "Mrs. Reed holds several active accounts within this institution," she began. "In addition to a primary checking account, there are 3 managed investment portfolios, 2 long-term growth funds, and 1 restricted trust account." Emily's breath caught audibly. "No," she whispered under her breath. Karen continued as if she hadn't heard her. "The managed portfolios are diversified across multiple sectors, including real estate equities and municipal bonds. These have been active for approximately 7 years. 7 years, right after Richard passed. I remembered those nights vividly, sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop I barely knew how to use, reading, learning, failing, trying again. No one saw that version of me. No one except me." Daniel spoke again, but this time there was no confidence left in his voice. "How much are we talking about?" he asked. Karen paused, not because she didn't know, but because she understood the weight of the answer. "I believe," she said carefully, "that is something Mrs. Reed has the right to disclose herself, if she chooses." The room went still again. All eyes turned to me. Emily's face had completely changed now. Gone was the certainty. Gone was the quiet superiority. In its place was something I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty, and something deeper. Fear. "Mom," she said softly, "please, just tell me what's going on." Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time she sounded like my daughter again. Not the woman who walked into this bank ready to take control, but the girl who didn't understand something and needed answers. I took a slow breath. Not to build suspense, not to enjoy the moment, but because what I was about to say would change everything. "When your father passed," I began quietly, "he didn't leave us a fortune." Emily frowned, slightly confused. "But he left enough?" I continued for me to make a choice. I paused, letting my words settle. I could have lived comfortably, quietly, safely. I looked at her, but I didn't. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "What are you saying?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I'm saying I learned." The simplicity of that sentence seemed to confuse him more than anything else. "I studied every night," I continued. "I met with advisors. I made small investments at first. Some failed, some didn't." Karen gave a small, almost imperceptible nod beside me. "I didn't tell anyone," I added, Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to understand what I was doing before I spoke about it. Emily shook her head slowly. No, that's not possible, she said. You don't do things like that. There it was, the truth she didn't realize she had been carrying all along. You don't do things like that? I smiled gently. That's what you believed I said. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Regret shock, or the painful realization that she never really knew me at all. Karen cleared her throat softly. If I may, she said, Mrs. Reed's total portfolio value across all accounts has shown consistent growth over the past several years. Daniel leaned forward slightly. How much, he asked again, more urgently now. Karen looked at me one last time. I gave a small nod. She turned back to them. Currently, she said, her voice calm and precise, the combined value exceeds $2.8 million. The number landed like a thunderclap. Emily's knees seemed to weaken. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Daniel didn't move at all, didn't blink, didn't speak. Because for the first time in his life, he had miscalculated completely. And Emily looked at me like she was seeing me for the very first time, not as someone small, not as someone fragile, but as someone she had never taken the time to understand. Mom, she whispered, and this time she didn't sound like she was asking for control. She sounded like she had just lost it. The number didn't just sit in the air. It pressed down on everything. $2.8 million. I watched it settle into Emily's expression, slowly replacing confusion with something much heavier. Shock. Real, undeniable shock. That's, Daniel finally said, his voice dry. That's not possible. Karen didn't respond. She didn't need to. The screen in front of her was all the proof required. Emily turned toward me again, her eyes wide, searching my face for something, anything, that could make sense of what she had just heard. You've been hiding this from me, she asked, her voice trembling between disbelief and accusation. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't what she expected. I didn't hide anything, I said calmly. Her eyebrows pulled together. Yes, you did, she snapped louder now. You let me believe you had nothing. You let me think that I was weak. I finished gently. The words hit her harder than anything else. She froze. Because deep down, she knew it was true. Daniel stepped in quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. This isn't about perception, he said, his tone shifting back toward authority. This is about transparency. If there are assets, legal structures, trusts, those things need to be managed properly. Managed? There it was again. That word. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. And who exactly should manage them? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Well, obviously, Daniel. Emily interrupted quickly, her VVO. Daniel? Emily interrupted quickly, her VO, ice tense. But it was too late. He had already stepped too far forward. Someone who understands how these things work, he finished. Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. I studied his face carefully. The confidence was still there, but now was tense. But it was too late. He had already stepped too far forward. Someone who understands how these things work, he finished. Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. I studied his face carefully. The confidence was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Greed. Not loud, not obvious, but present. clear enough for me to finally see what had been hiding beneath the surface all along. I understand how they work, I said quietly. He blinked. You just said you learned, he replied almost dismissively. I did, I said, and I never stopped. Karen shifted slightly beside me, her posture straightening, as if silently supporting that statement. Mr. Collins, who had been silent for most of this exchange, finally spoke again. Mrs. Reed's accounts show consistent strategic growth, he said. These aren't passive holdings. They've been actively managed. Actively managed. Emily looked between us, her confusion deepening. By who, she asked. No one answered right away, and then it clicked. I saw it happen, the moment the realization formed behind her eyes. Her gaze slowly returned to me. You, she whispered. I nodded once. The room seemed to tilt slightly for her, because everything she believed about me, every assumption, every quiet judgment, was collapsing all at once. No, she said, shaking her head. No, you don't. You don't even like dealing with numbers. You always said I didn't understand them, I corrected gently. That doesn't mean I couldn't learn. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This doesn't change anything, he said, his tone hardening again. If anything, it makes this situation more serious. Large assets require proper oversight, legal protection, structured management. I tilted my head slightly, and again I asked, who do you believe should provide that? He hesitated this time. Just for a second, but it was enough. Emily noticed it too. Her eyes flicked toward him, something unspoken passing between them, something that suddenly didn't feel as aligned as it had before. Karen cleared her throat softly. If I may, she said, there is another detail that hasn't been discussed yet. Something that suddenly didn't feel as aligned as it had before. Karen cleared her throat softly. If I may, she said, there is another detail that hasn't been discussed yet. All attention shifted back to her. What detail? Daniel asked. Karen glanced at the screen, then back at me. Mrs. Reed's restricted trust account, she said, includes specific conditions regarding access and control. Emily frowned. What kind of conditions? Karen's tone remained steady. The kind that limit who can access the funds and under what circumstances. The air shifted again. Daniel straightened. Limit, how he asked. Karen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked directly at me. Would you like me to explain? She asked. I considered it for a moment. This wasn't just about revealing numbers anymore. This was about revealing intentions, motives, truths that couldn't be taken back once spoken aloud. Yes, I said quietly. Karen nodded. The trust was established approximately 6 years ago, she began. It designates Mrs. Reed as the primary controller of all assets within the structure. Daniel frowned. That's normal, he said. Most trusts do. Karen didn't react. She continued. However, the trust also includes a succession clause. That got his attention. What kind of clause? Karen's eyes flicked briefly toward Emily, then back to the screen. In the event that Mrs. Reed becomes incapacitated or chooses to transfer control, she said, authority does not automatically pass to immediate family members. The words landed slowly, but heavily. Emily blinked. What do you mean, not to family? Karen met her gaze. It means she said clearly that control is assigned based on predetermined criteria, not relationship alone. Silence. Daniel's expression tightened. What criteria? He asked. Karen hesitated, just slightly. Then she spoke. The successor must meet specific conditions outlined in the trust. These include financial responsibility, independent stability, and... She paused, almost as if choosy, and she paused, almost as if choosing whether to say the last part out loud. And Emily pressed. Karen finished the sentence. Demonstrated good faith in prior interactions with the primary account holder. The room went completely still, because suddenly, whether to say the last part out loud. And Emily pressed. Karen finished the sentence. Demonstrated good faith in prior interactions with the primary account holder. The room went completely still, because suddenly, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about something far more uncomfortable. Character. Emily's face drained of color. What does that even mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, character. Emily's face drained of color. What does that even mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was no anger in me, no desire to prove anything, only a quiet, undeniable truth. It means, I said softly, that this was never just about money. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out, because, for the first time, neither of them knew where they stood, and that uncertainty was something they had never prepared for. The silence after my words wasn't just uncomfortable, it was exposing. Emily's hands were still gripping the edge of the counter, but now, it wasn't to steady herself physically. It was to hold on to something, anything, that still made sense. This doesn't feel real, she said quietly, her voice thin, almost fragile. None of this feels real. I understood that feeling, because once upon a time, I had stood exactly where she was standing now, lost, uncertain, realizing that everything I thought I understood was incomplete. Daniel, however, wasn't ready to accept that reality. No, he said sharply, shaking his head. There's something missing here. His tone had changed again. Less confident, more defensive. This kind of structure, this kind of money, it doesn't just happen. There has to be someone advising you, someone behind this. I looked at him steadily. Why does there have to be someone else? I asked. He frowned. Because people don't just build something like this on their own. I let out a quiet breath. You're right, I said. For a split second, relief flashed across his face, until I finished the sentence. They don't. Not at first. The relief disappeared instantly. I had help, I continued. In the beginning, I asked questions. I made mistakes. I listened. Karen nodded slightly as if confirming that this was not unusual. But at some point I added, you stop following advice and you start understanding it. Emily's eyes never left my face. She wasn't even blinking anymore. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice breaking just enough to reveal something deeper beneath the shock. That question, that one question, cut deeper than everything else. Because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about control. It was about distance. And the truth of that distance wasn't simple. I tried, I said softly. Her brow furrowed. When? She asked. I searched her face for recognition, for memory, for anything that might connect us back to those moments. Do you remember I said slowly about 5 years ago when I asked you if you wanted to sit down with me and go over some things I was learning? She blinked. Confusion flickered. I don't. You said you were busy. I continued gently, that it sounded boring. Her lips parted. A faint memory began to surface in her eyes. I asked again, I said. A year later. I told you I had made some progress. That I was excited about it. She looked down slightly now. And you said I paused. Not because I didn't remember, but because I wanted her to. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I said you should be careful because people your age get taken advantage of. I nodded. Yes, I said. The words weren't harsh, but the truth behind them was, I didn't blame you for that, I added. You were worried. Emily shook her head slowly. No, I wasn't just worried, she admitted. I didn't think you understood what you were doing. I didn't blame you for that, I added. You were worried. Emily shook her head slowly. No, I wasn't just worried, she admitted. I didn't think you understood what you were doing. There it was, finally spoken out loud. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. This isn't about the past, he said quickly. We need to focus on what happens now. But Emily didn't move, didn't look at him, because, for the first time, she wasn't following his lead. She was facing me, and the reality between us. What happens now? She repeated quietly. Karen glanced at me silently, offering me the choice again. Because that was the difference now. Every step forward was mine to decide. I think I said slowly, that depends on what you came here for. Emily hesitated. The question caught her off guard. Because until this moment, she hadn't really questioned her own intentions. I wanted to help you, she said. The words sounded uncertain, unfinished. I held her gaze. Help me how I asked. She swallowed. I thought you didn't have enough, she said. I thought you were struggling and that you didn't want to admit it. There was honesty in her voice now. Real honesty. Not the kind that hides behind control, but the kind that comes when someone realizes they might have been wrong. And if that had been true? I asked. She hesitated. I would have stepped in, she said. I would have made sure everything was taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated softly. Daniel finally spoke again. There's nothing wrong with that, he said. That's what family does. I looked at him. Yes, I said, when it's done with respect. That word lingered. Respect, simple, but powerful. Emily's eyes filled slightly. I didn't mean to disrespect you, she said. I know, I replied, and I meant it, because disrespect doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from assumption, from thinking you already understand someone without ever asking who they've become. Karen glanced at the screen again, then back at me. There is one more detail regarding the trust, she said carefully. Daniel sighed under his breath. What now? He muttered. Karen ignored him. The trust includes a review clause, she continued. It allows the primary account holder to evaluate potential successors before any transfer of control occurs. Emily looked up again. Evaluate, she asked. Karen nodded. Yes. It's designed to ensure that any future control aligns with the original intent of the account holder. And what is that intent? Daniel asked, his tone sharper now. Karen didn't answer. Because that answer wasn't hers to give. I took a slow breath, and then I spoke. My intent, I said, was never to create distance. Emily's eyes locked onto mine. It was to create stability. I continued. Security. Independence. I paused. And clarity. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? He asked. I met his gaze. It means, I said, that I needed to know who I could trust before I handed over something I spent years building. The words landed exactly where they needed to. Emily flinched slightly. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. "Mom," she whispered. And this time, there was no argument in her voice, only something fragile, something uncertain, something real. "I didn't know," she said. I nodded slowly. "I know," I replied, and for the first time since we walked into that bank, the tension in the room shifted. Not gone, not resolved, but changed. Because now, we weren't standing on opposite sides anymore. We were standing in the truth. And the truth was only just beginning to unfold. The truth didn't explode. It didn't shatter the room in one dramatic moment. Instead, it settled. Slowly, quietly. Like dust after something heavy had been dropped. Emily was still staring at me, but now her eyes weren't searching for answers. They were searching for understanding. And that was something she had never needed from me before. "What does that mean for us?" she asked carefully. The way she said it, us felt different, less entitled, more uncertain, more human. I took a breath, considering my answer. Because this wasn't about numbers anymore. It wasn't even about the trust. It was about what came after truth. "It means," I said slowly, "that nothing changes unless you want it to." Her brow furrowed. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "It does," I replied gently. "Because I didn't build this to replace my family." Daniel let out a quiet scoff under his breath. "Then what did you build it for?" he asked. I turned to him. "I built it so I would never have to depend on anyone who didn't see me clearly." The words weren't loud, but they landed harder than anything else I had said so far. Because they weren't about the past. They were about the present. Daniel didn't respond immediately this time, because for the first time, he understood exactly what I meant. Emily, however, looked like she was unraveling piece by piece. "I do see you," she said quickly, almost desperately. I tilted my head slightly. "Do you?" I asked. She hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Because seeing someone isn't about looking at them, it's about understanding them, and that takes time. Attention, respect. Things we hadn't had in a long time. "I want to," she said, her voice softening. That was the first honest thing she had said since we walked into that bank. Not "I do," but "I want to," and that was a beginning. Karen glanced between us, then quietly stepped back half a pace, giving the moment space to breathe. Even Mr. Collins remained silent, as if he understood this was no longer a financial conversation. This was something else entirely. Emily slowly released her grip on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as they fell to her sides. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "I believe you," I replied. She looked surprised by that. "Then why does it feel like I did something wrong?" she asked. I gave a small, sad smile. "Because sometimes I said good intentions don't protect us from the consequences of how we treat people." Her eyes filled again. Not with shock this time, but with something heavier. Accountability. Daniel shifted beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was going. "This is getting emotional," he said. "We should stay focused on the financial side of things." Emily didn't look at him, didn't respond, because for the first time, she wasn't following his lead. She was thinking for herself. "No," she said quietly. "This is exactly where we need to be." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're letting this turn into something it doesn't need to be," he argued. Emily finally turned toward him, and the look in her eyes had changed. Not angry, not defensive, clear. "No," she said again. "I think we already did that a long time ago." The shift was subtle, but undeniable. And Daniel felt it. I could see it in the way his posture stiffened, in the way his confidence flickered just for a moment. Because control was slipping. "Emily," he said more carefully, "now we're talking about a significant financial structure. There are legal responsibilities here, and there are emotional ones too." She cut in. That surprised him. It surprised me too, because I hadn't heard her speak like that in years. Maybe ever. Karen glanced at me briefly. A silent acknowledgement. Something was changing. Right here. Right now. Emily turned back to me. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," she said. "I came because I thought you needed me." I nodded slowly. "I understand that." She swallowed. "But I didn't ask if you wanted that," she admitted. There it was again. Another truth. And each one brought us a little closer to something real. "No," I said gently. "You didn't." The words weren't accusatory. They didn't need to be. The weight of them was enough. Daniel let out a breath, clearly frustrated. "So what now?" he asked. "We just walk away from all of this?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "We don't walk away." He frowned. "Then what?" I turned slightly toward Karen. "Can you pull up the trust documentation summary?" I asked. Karen nodded immediately and began navigating the system. Within seconds, a structured document appeared on the screen. Clean, precise, carefully written. "This trust," I said, "was never meant to exclude anyone." Emily listened closely now. Fully. Present in a way she hadn't been before. "It was meant to protect what I built," I continued, "and to make sure that whoever steps into it understands what it took to get here." Daniel crossed his arms. "And how exactly does someone prove that?" he asked. I looked at him, then at Emily. "You don't prove it with words," I said. "You prove it with actions." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "What kind of actions?" she asked. I took a breath. Because this was the moment where everything shifted from revelation. Emily nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "What kind of actions?" she asked. I took a breath. Because this was the moment where everything shifted from revelation to decision. "It starts with honesty," I said. Her eyes held mine. "And then?" she asked. "Respect," I continued. "Patience, and the willingness to listen before assuming." She nodded again, more firmly this time, as if something inside her had settled. "I can do that," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her sharply. "Emily." She shook her head slightly, stopping him. "No," she said. "Just stop for a second." And he did, because for the first time, he wasn't leading. She turned back to me. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," she said. "I know I haven't earned that." Her voice was steady now, grounded. "But I want the chance to." I studied her carefully, looking for anything that might feel rehearsed, anything that might feel strategic. But there was nothing. Just sincerity, raw, unpolished, real. And for the first time in years, I believed her. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to consider what came next. This trust, I said slowly, was designed to give me time. Emily listened closely. "Time to see who people really are," I continued. "Not who they say they are when something is at stake." She nodded. "I understand." I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I spoke the words that would define everything moving forward. "Then we start there." A small breath escaped her lips. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Hope. And hope was something we hadn't shared in a very long time. Hope is a fragile thing. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It simply appears, quietly, uncertainly. And if you're not careful, it disappears just as quickly. As we stood there in that polished, silent bank, I realized something I hadn't expected. This moment wasn't the climax. It was a test. Not of money, not of control, but of truth. And truth doesn't end when it's revealed. That's when it begins. I don't want to rush this, I said, my voice calm but firm. Emily nodded immediately. I don't either. Daniel, however, exhaled sharply. With all due respect, he said, this isn't something you take your time with. There are financial implications here, tax considerations, legal exposure. Daniel! Emily's voice stopped him. Not loud, but final. He looked at her surprised. I said I don't want to rush this, she repeated. There was something new in her tone. Not defiance, not rebellion, authority. And it didn't come from ego. It came from clarity. He stared at her for a moment longer, then looked away, because he realized something too. He wasn't in control anymore. Karen stepped forward slightly. If I may suggest, she said gently, there are ways to structure a gradual review process. Nothing needs to be decided today. I appreciated that. Because she understood something most people didn't. Decisions made under pressure rarely lead to truth. They can schedule periodic reviews, she continued. Discussions, evaluations over time. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I want. Emily looked relieved. Not because she was getting something, but because she wasn't losing everything. At least, not yet. Daniel crossed his arms. And what exactly are we reviewing? He asked. I turned to face him fully. Everything I said. His eyes narrowed. That's not specific. It's not supposed to be, I replied. Because this wasn't a checklist. This was a process, a revealing one. I want to see how you both move forward, I continued. Not how you react today. Emily absorbed that quietly, but Daniel didn't like it. This is subjective, he said. There's no clear standard. I gave a small, knowing smile. There is, I said. And what is that? Consistency. That word hung in the air. Because consistency is something you can't fake. Not over time. Not when no one is watching. Emily nodded slowly. That's fair, she said. Daniel looked at her again, clearly frustrated. You're agreeing to this? He asked. She met his gaze. I'm understanding it. That difference mattered. A lot. Karen glanced down at her notes, then back at me. We can formalize a review timeline if you'd like, she said. Monthly, quarterly, whatever you feel is appropriate. Quarterly, I said after a moment. Emily nodded. That makes sense. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he realized every time he pushed, he lost ground, and he was starting to feel it. Mr. Collins cleared his throat quietly. I'll make sure all documentation reflects that structure, he said. I appreciated his calm presence. He hadn't interfered, hadn't pushed, just observed, and now supported. That mattered. Thank you, I said. He nodded once. Emily shifted slightly, stepping closer to me. Not too close, but closer than before. I don't expect this to be easy, she said. It won't be, I replied honestly. She nodded. I'm okay with that. I studied her again, looking for hesitation, for doubt. But there was something different in her now. Not perfection, but willingness. And sometimes that's enough to begin. Daniel, however, wasn't finished. "This still doesn't address the core issue," he said. I turned to him. "And what do you believe that is?" He gestured toward the screen. "The scale of this," he said. "This isn't just personal savings. This is a significant financial structure. It needs professional oversight." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean your oversight?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "I mean qualified oversight," he corrected. I nodded slowly. "I agree." That surprised him. "You do?" "Yes," I said, which is why I already have it. Karen didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence alone answered the question. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So where does that leave us?" he asked. I held his gaze. "It leaves you where you choose to stand." He frowned. "That's vague." "No," I said. "It's honest because the truth was simple." He wasn't being excluded. He just wasn't being handed control. And that was something he clearly hadn't expected. Something he clearly hadn't expected. Emily stepped in again. "Daniel," she said quietly, "this isn't about control." He looked at her sharply. "Then what is it about?" She hesitated, then answered, "It's about trust." The word landed heavier than anything else, because Trustly stepped in again. "Daniel," she said quietly, "this isn't about control." He looked at her sharply. "Then what is it about?" She hesitated, then answered, "It's about trust." The word landed heavier than anything else, because trust isn't given, it's built, and it can be lost much faster than it's earned. Daniel looked between us, then let out a slow breath. "You're asking us to prove something he said." "Yes," I replied. He shook his head slightly. "That's not how family works." I met his gaze. "That's exactly how it works," I said. "When it's real." Silence, because that truth was uncomfortable. Emily looked down briefly, then back up. "I want to start over," she said. The words were simple, but powerful and rare. Because starting over requires humility. "I'm not asking you to forget anything," she added. "I just want the chance to do better." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something softer. Something open. "We don't start over by pretending the past didn't happen," I said gently. She nodded. "I know. We start over by facing it," I continued. She took a slow breath. "Then I'm ready to do that." I held her gaze, long enough to see that she meant it, and then I nodded. "Okay." That one word changed everything. Because it wasn't approval. It wasn't resolution. It was permission. Permission to try. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can give someone. Daniel looked at both of us, clearly unsure where he stood now. Because the dynamic had shifted. Completely. And he hadn't been part of that shift. Not really. Karen began organizing the documents on the screen, preparing the next steps. Mr. Collins noted something quietly on his tablet. Everything was moving forward, but not in the way anyone had expected when we first walked into that bank. Emily stepped back slightly, giving me space again. But the distance between us was no longer the same. It wasn't cold. It wasn't disconnected. It was cautious. And cautious was a beginning. As we prepared to leave, I glanced one last time at the numbers on the screen. $2.8 million. For years, I thought that number would define everything. But standing there now, I realized something far more important. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was what it revealed and what it would continue to reveal in the days ahead. Leaving the bank felt different than I expected. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation. No one stormed out. Instead, we walked out quietly, side by side, but not quite together. The glass doors closed behind us with a soft click, and for a moment, the world outside felt almost too normal. Cars passing, people talking, life continuing, as if nothing inside that building had just shifted something fundamental between us. Emily stood beside me, her arms loosely crossed, her posture no longer rigid but not fully relaxed either. Daniel lingered a few steps behind, checking his phone, but I could feel his attention still locked on us. Waiting, calculating, trying to understand where he fit now. I didn't expect today to go like this, Emily said softly. I let out a small breath. Neither did I. She glanced at me. Are you angry with me? The question was fragile, careful, like she was afraid of the answer. I considered it honestly, because this wasn't the time for comfort that wasn't real. No, I said. She looked surprised. Not angry, I continued, but I am aware. Of what? She asked. Of how long it's been since we really talked, I said. Her expression shifted, not defensive, but reflective. Yeah, she admitted quietly. It has been a long time. We stood there for a moment, letting that truth settle between us. Because time is one of the hardest things to face. You can't get it back. You can only decide what to do with what's left. Daniel finally stepped closer, slipping his phone into his pocket. So, what's the next step? He asked, straight to the point. Of course. Emily didn't answer him this time. She looked at me, waiting. That was new, and it didn't go unnoticed. The next step, I said slowly, is simple. They both watched me. You come over for dinner. Daniel blinked. That's it, he asked. I nodded. That's it. He frowned slightly. I thought we were talking about structured evaluations, quarterly reviews. We are, I said, but that's not where it starts. Emily's lips parted slightly, like she was beginning to understand. It starts with something normal, I continued. Something real. Something that has nothing to do with money. Daniel looked unconvinced. That doesn't sound very efficient. I gave a small smile. This isn't about efficiency. It never was. Emily nodded slowly. I'd like that, she said. And for the first time that day, there was something warm in her voice. Not fear, not pressure, just sincerity. What time? She asked. 6, I said. Tomorrow. She nodded. We'll be there. Daniel hesitated, then gave a short nod as well. Okay. But I could see it in his eyes. He still didn't understand, and that was going to matter, more than he realized. The next evening came faster than I expected. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the counter, trying to decide if I had overthought everything or not thought enough. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for a long time, too long. I reached for a plate, then paused, because suddenly this didn't feel like just dinner. It felt like something fragile, something that could either begin to heal or break completely. The doorbell rang. Right on time. Of course. I took a breath before walking to the door. When I opened it, Emily stood there holding a small bouquet of flowers. Simple, nothing extravagant, but thoughtful. "I wasn't sure what you'd like," she said. I looked at them, then at her. "They're perfect," I said, and I meant it. Because it wasn't about the flowers. It was about the effort. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his pockets, offering a polite nod. "Evening," he said. "Come in," I replied. They stepped inside, and for a moment, everything felt because it wasn't about the flowers. It was about the effort. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his pockets, offering a polite nod. "Evening," he said. "Come in," I replied. They stepped inside, and for a moment, everything felt unfamiliar. Like we were guests in each other's lives. Emily looked around. "You haven't changed much," she said. I smiled slightly. "I didn't see a reason to." She nodded, but I could tell she noticed the details. The framed photos, the books, the small things that told a story she hadn't been part of. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. "You can sit." We moved into the dining room, and the air was filled with a quiet tension. Not hostile, but careful, measured, like every word mattered, because it did. We sat down, and for a few minutes we talked about safe things. Traffic, weather. Small, ordinary conversations that felt almost rehearsed. Until Emily finally broke the pattern. "Can I ask you something?" she said. I looked at her. "Of course." She hesitated for just a second. "Why didn't you tell me how well you were doing?" There it was again. That question. But this time, it felt different. Less accusatory. More curious. I set my fork down. "Because I didn't think it would change how you saw me," I said. She frowned slightly. "It would have," she said. I shook my head gently. "No," I replied. "It would have changed how you treated me." That made her pause. "And that's not the same thing." Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. "That's a bit harsh," he said. I looked at him. It's honest. Emily looked down at her plate, absorbing that. "I didn't realize I was doing that," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. And again, I meant it. Because most people don't realize when they stop seeing someone clearly. It happens slowly, over time, through assumptions, through distance, through silence. I think she began, then stopped. "What?" I asked gently. "I think I stopped seeing you as someone who is still growing," she said. The words were careful, but real. "I thought you were settled. Fixed." I nodded. "A lot of people think that about others," I said, "especially family." She looked up at me. "I don't want to do that anymore." I held her gaze. "You won't," I said, "if you keep paying attention." Daniel leaned back slightly, clearly less comfortable with the direction of the conversation. "So how does this tie back to the trust?" he asked. There it was. He couldn't stay away from it. Not yet. Emily didn't even look at him this time. "It doesn't," she said. He blinked. "What do you mean?" "It means," she continued, "that if we can't get this part right, the trust doesn't matter?" Silence filled the room. Because that was the truth. And Daniel knew it, even if he didn't like it. I leaned back slightly, watching her, seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in a long time. And I realized something. This process was already working, not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted, something real, something that couldn't be forced, only revealed. And as we sat there finishing dinner, talking more openly than we had in years, I understood something else. This wasn't about rebuilding what we had before. That was gone. This was about building something new, something better, something honest. And that would take time. But for the first time, I was willing to give it. The first dinner didn't fix anything, but it changed something. And sometimes that's more powerful. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Not perfect, not easy, but intentional. Emily came by every Sunday. At first, always with Daniel. Then occasionally, without him. And that difference mattered more than anything she said out loud, because it told me something simple. She wasn't just showing up for the outcome. She was showing up for the process. The second Sunday, she brought dessert. The third, she offered to cook. The fourth, she asked questions. Real ones. Not about the trust. Not about the money. But about me. What was it like starting over after Dad passed? She asked one evening, her voice careful. I paused, because that wasn't an easy question. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. Lonely, I said finally. She nodded slowly. I didn't realize that. I know, I replied gently. And I did know. Because grief doesn't always show itself the way people expect. Sometimes it looks like independence. Sometimes it looks like strength. Sometimes it looks like silence. Daniel, however, remained consistent in a different way. Present, polite, but distant. Watching, always watching. He participated in conversations when invited, offered observations when relevant, but he never quite relaxed, and I began to understand why. This process didn't give him anything to hold on to. No clear rules, no defined outcome, no leverage, just time. And time reveals things people would rather keep hidden. One evening, about 6 weeks after that first dinner, something shifted again. We had just finished eating. Emily was helping me clear the table while Daniel remained seated scrolling through something on his phone. You don't have to do that, I said as she gathered the plates. I want to, she replied. Simple, unforced. We moved into the kitchen together, and for a moment it felt familiar. Like something we used to do. A long time ago. I've been thinking, she said quietly as she rinsed a plate. That's dangerous, I teased lightly. She smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. There was a pause, then she turned slightly toward me. I think I know why I said that at the bank. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, because this mattered. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, she continued. I really believed it. I know I said. She nodded, but I think part of me needed to believe it. That caught my attention. Why I asked gently. She hesitated, then answered. Because if you didn't have anything, then I didn't have to feel guilty. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. What would you feel guilty about? I asked. She swallowed. Not being there, she said. The room went quiet. Because that was the truth we hadn't said yet. I told myself you were fine, she continued. That you didn't need me. That you liked being independent. I leaned lightly against the counter. And what do you think now? I asked. Her eyes met mine. I think I didn't want to see you struggling because I didn't know how to fix it. I nodded slowly. That's honest. She exhaled. I thought if I came in and handled things, I could make up for it. And now I asked. She looked down at her hands. Now I think I need to just be here. There it was. No control, no fixing, just presence. And that was everything I had wanted. For years. I'd like that, I said softly. She nodded, her eyes slightly glossy but steady. Behind us, Daniel shifted in his chair. "You're making this sound like we abandoned you," he said. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't neutral either. Emily turned toward him. "No," she said calmly. "We're talking about what actually happened." He frowned. "We visited. We called." "Not really," she said. That stopped him, because it wasn't said with anger. It was said with clarity. And clarity is hard to argue with. "You were busy," she continued. "We both were. But that doesn't change the outcome." Daniel leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "So what now?" he asked. "We just sit here and dissect the past." I stepped in before Emily could respond. "No," I said. "We understand it." He looked at me, and then we decide what we do differently." He held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. Because again, there was no argument for that. Just a choice. The room settled into a quieter energy after that. Not tense, but thoughtful. Emily finished drying the last plate and set it down carefully. "I want to keep doing this," she said. I looked at her. "Doing what?" "This," she said, gesturing between us, "showing up, talking, listening." I nodded. "So do I." Daniel didn't say anything, but his silence spoke loudly, because while Emily was stepping forward, he was still deciding whether to follow. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Emily paused at the door. "Next Sunday?" she asked. I smiled. "Next Sunday." She nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you," she added. "For what?" "For not shutting me out," she said. I held her gaze. "I almost did," I admitted. She nodded. "I'm glad you didn't." So was I, but not for the reasons she thought. "Because this, for what? For not shutting me out," she said. I held her gaze. "I almost did," I admitted. She nodded. "I'm glad you didn't." So was I, but not for the reasons she thought. Because this wasn't about keeping her close. It was about seeing who she chose to be when she didn't have to. And as the door closed behind them, I stood there for a moment listening to the quiet again. But it didn't feel the same. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Waiting for the next conversation, the next truth, the next choice. And I realized something important. The trust wasn't testing them. Not really. It was revealing them. And so far, Emily was changing, growing, becoming someone I could recognize again. But Daniel, he was still a question. And questions have a way of answering themselves. Eventually, consistency reveals truth. That's what I told them, but I didn't say the other half out loud. Consistency also exposes what people are trying to hide. And by the third month, Daniel started to crack. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, telling ways. At first, it was subtle. He began checking his phone more often during dinner, interrupting conversations to take calls outside, excusing himself with vague explanations that didn't quite line up. "Work," he would say. "Just something urgent." At first, I didn't question it, because life happens. People get busy. But patterns don't lie. Emily noticed it too. I could see it in the way her eyes followed him when he stepped away. The way her voice hesitated when she returned to conversation after he left the room. The way she stopped finishing her sentences. Because part of her attention was somewhere else. With him. One Sunday evening, it became impossible to ignore. We were halfway through dinner when his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it quickly, too quickly, then stood up. "I need to take this," he said. Emily frowned slightly. "Can it wait?" "No," he replied. "It's important." He didn't look at her when he said it. That mattered, because people who are telling the truth usually meet your eyes. He stepped outside. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was heavier than usual. Emily stared at her plate for a moment, then sighed. "This has been happening a lot," she admitted. I didn't rush to respond, because this wasn't something that needed to be filled. It needed to be understood. "Do you know what it is?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "He says it's work," she said. "But it doesn't feel like work." "What does it feel like?" I asked. She hesitated, then said something I didn't expect. "Like he doesn't want me to hear it? That was different and important." "Have you asked him?" I said. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah," she said. "He says, I'm overthinking." I nodded slowly. "That's a convenient answer." She looked up at me. "You think so too?" "I think," I said carefully, "that when something feels off, it usually is." She absorbed that quietly, because deep down, she already knew. She just needed someone to confirm she wasn't imagining it. Daniel returned a few minutes later, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Sorry about that," he said, sitting back down. Emily looked at him. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just work stuff." She held his gaze. "Are you sure?" He smiled, a little too easily. "Of course." And there it was, that small disconnect between what was said and what was real. The rest of dinner continued, but the energy had shifted. Emily was quieter, more observant. Daniel tried to steer the conversation back to normal, but it felt forced. And I didn't intervene, because this wasn't my moment. It was theirs. After they left, I stood in the kitchen replaying everything in my mind. Not the words, but the pauses, the glances, the timing. Because that's where truth lives. Not in what people say, but in what they avoid. The next Sunday, Daniel didn't come. Emily showed up alone. That by itself wasn't unusual anymore. But something about her was different. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. "You okay?" I asked as she stepped inside. She forced a small smile. "Yeah," she said. But it didn't reach her eyes. We sat down, and for a while we talked about ordinary things again. But I could feel it. Something was waiting, something she wasn't sure how to say. Finally, she set her fork down. "I think something's going on with Daniel," she said. There it was. I nodded slowly. "What makes you say that?" I asked. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Like she was deciding whether to trust herself or doubt herself again. "He's been distant," she said. "Secretive, defensive." She paused, and I checked our bank account. That caught my attention. "And?" I asked. Her voice dropped slightly. "There are withdrawals I don't recognize." Silence filled the room. Because that was no longer a feeling. That was a fact. How much I asked gently. She swallowed. Enough that I noticed. That was all she needed to say. Because when money is involved, people notice quickly. "And he didn't tell you?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." I leaned back slightly. "Have you asked him about it?" She nodded. "He said it was investment," she replied. "Something he didn't want to burden me with." I let out a quiet breath. That's interesting. She gave a small, bitter smile. Yeah, that's one word for it. There was a pause. Then she looked at me again. Do you think he's lying? The question was direct, raw, and dangerous, because the answer could change everything. I think I said carefully that something isn't being fully explained. She nodded slowly. That's what it feels like. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what to do. And there it was, the moment. Not about money, not about the trust, but about her life, her marriage, her reality. What do you want to do? I asked. She hesitated. I want the truth, she said. Then you already know what to do, I replied. She looked at me, uncertain. Do I? Yes, I said. You ask again, and if he doesn't tell me, I held her gaze. Then you decide what that means. Silence, because that's the hardest part. Not asking the question, but facing the answer. Or the lack of one. Emily exhaled slowly. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? I asked gently. That I've been wrong about him? She said. I nodded. That's a valid fear. She looked at me. But what if I have been? She asked. I leaned forward slightly. Then you're not wrong for seeing it now, I said. Her eyes softened slightly. Most people, I continued, don't want to see the truth when it's uncomfortable. She nodded. I didn't, she admitted. But you are now, I said. And that mattered, more than anything, because clarity is the beginning of change. Later that evening, as she stood at the door, she hesitated again. I'm going to talk to him tonight, she said. I nodded. Good. She took a breath. Whatever happens, I'm glad I came back. I looked at her. So am I. Because this was the real test. Not the trust, not the money, but the choices she would make when faced with something difficult. And as the door closed behind her, I realized something that sent a quiet chill through me. The truth wasn't just revealing Emily. It was revealing Daniel too. And whatever he was hiding wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. The night Emily said she would confront Daniel, I didn't sleep well. Not because I doubted her, but because I understood what that kind of conversation does to a person. It forces clarity, and clarity changes everything. The next morning, I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't check in. Because this wasn't something I could guide. It was something she had to face on her own. But the waiting, that was harder than I expected. Hours passed. Then the day. Then the evening, and still nothing. By the time Sunday came again, I had already prepared myself for two possibilities. She would show up pretending everything was fine. Or she wouldn't show up at all. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Right on time. That in itself told me something. When I opened the door, Emily stood there alone. No flowers, no forced smile. Just honesty. You look tired, I said gently. She exhaled. I am. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked in slowly, like the weight of the past few days was still sitting on her shoulders. We didn't go straight to the table. We didn't pretend this was a normal dinner. Instead, we sat in the living room, facing each other. Because this was the conversation. I asked him, she said. No hesitation, no buildup, just truth. And I asked. Her eyes didn't leave mine. He lied, she said. The words were steady, but beneath them, there was something breaking. What did he say? I asked. He said it was investments again, she replied. Same explanation, same tone, like he expected me to just accept it. I nodded slowly. And did you? She shook her head. No. There was a pause. Then she added quietly, I asked to see the accounts. That made me sit a little straighter. And he refused. The room fell silent because that wasn't just suspicion anymore. That was a boundary, and he had drawn it clearly. I told him that wasn't okay, she continued, that we don't keep secrets like that. Her voice trembled slightly now, and he said I was overreacting. I closed my eyes for a brief moment because I had heard that pattern before. Minimize, deflect, invalidate. It's a cycle. And then I asked gently. She swallowed. Then I told him I already saw the withdrawals. There it was, the turning point. What did he say to that? I asked. Her expression shifted, tightened. He got angry. Of course he did. Not loud, she clarified, but cold. She looked down at her hands. He said I violated his privacy. I let out a slow breath. That's convenient, I said quietly. She nodded. That's what it felt like. Another silence, heavier this time, because now we weren't talking about confusion. We were talking about truth being resisted. What did you do? I asked. She looked up at me, and for the first time, there was something different in her eyes. Not fear, not uncertainty, clarity. I told him if he couldn't be honest with me, I couldn't trust him. My chest tightened slightly, because that's not an easy thing to say, not to someone you've built a life with. And how did he respond? I asked. She hesitated, then said something that made everything click into place. He said, trust goes both ways. I frowned slightly. What did he mean by that? Her gaze didn't waver. He said I was acting differently since the bank. There it was, the connection, the thing he had been holding on to. What exactly did he say? I asked. She took a breath. He said I was more focused on you and the trust than on our marriage. I leaned back slightly, absorbing that, because now it made sense. Not just the behavior, but the motive. And is that true? I asked carefully. She shook her head immediately. No, she said. That's not it. Then she paused. But something did change. I didn't interrupt. I started paying attention, she said. Her voice was quieter now, more reflective. I started asking questions I should have asked a long time ago. She looked at me, and he didn't like that. No, he wouldn't, because people who rely on silence struggle with clarity. What happened after that? I asked. She exhaled slowly. We argued, she said. Not yelling, but worse. How so? He shut down, she replied, completely. Her voice softened, like I wasn't even worth explaining things to. That hit deep, because indifference is often more painful than anger. And then, I asked. She hesitated, then said it. He left. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Final. For the night, I asked. She shook her head slowly. I don't know. Silence. Because that answer carries too many possibilities. Did he say where he was going? I asked. No. Did he take anything? Some clothes, she said. His laptop. I nodded slowly. Because that wasn't impulsive. that was prepared. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "3 nights," she replied. "And you haven't heard from him since?" She shook her head. "No." The room felt smaller, quieter, like everything had narrowed down to this moment. "What do you think is happening?" I asked gently. She didn't answer right away, because now she wasn't guessing. She was choosing what to believe. "I think," she began slowly. "I think he's been hiding something for a long time." I nodded. "That seems likely." She looked at me. "And I think he left because he knows I won't ignore it anymore." There it was. Clarity, painful, but clear. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She didn't hesitate this time. "I want the truth," she said. I gave a small, understanding nod. "Then we find it." She blinked slightly. Yes," I said calmly, because this was no longer just about her marriage. It was about patterns, about truth, about everything that had been hidden. And I had a feeling. It connected to more than just Daniel. "I think we should start with the money," I continued. She nodded. "I can get the statements," she said. "Everything I saw was through our joint account, but there are transfers to something else." "What kind of account?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the problem." I leaned forward slightly. "Then that's where we begin." She took a deep breath, and for the first time since she walked in, she looked steady. Not okay, but grounded. Because sometimes having a direction is enough. "I never thought it would come to this," she said quietly. I looked at her. Neither did I. But here we were, not at a bank, not talking about money, but standing at the edge of something much bigger, something that would either break everything apart or finally bring the truth to the surface. And as I watched her sit there stronger than she had been just weeks ago, I realized something. The trust had already done its job, not by giving her anything, but by forcing everything else into the light. Truth doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds, layer by layer. And sometimes the part you uncover first isn't the part that hurts the most. It's just the beginning. The next morning, Emily called me earlier than I expected. Her voice wasn't panicked. It wasn't broken. It was focused. "I got the statements," she said. That alone told me everything had shifted. "When can you come over?" I asked. "I'm already in." "You come over?" I asked. "I'm already in the car." Of course she was. 20 minutes later, she walked through my front door holding a thick folder. Not just papers, evidence. Her movements were precise, controlled, like someone who had already cried and moved past it. We sat at the dining table and she spread everything out between us. Bank statements, transaction logs, printed screenshots, all organized. "All of this is from the last 4 months," she said. I nodded, scanning the pages. At first glance, it looked like normal activity. Bills, groceries, routine expenses. But then, there they were. The transfers. Repeated, consistent, large. All going to the same account, she said, pointing to a series of numbers. "Do you recognize it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." I leaned closer. The name attached to the receiving account wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't Emily's. It wasn't anyone in the family. "Who is that?" I murmured. Emily's jaw tightened. "That's what I want to find out." We kept going, page after page, pattern after pattern. And then something stood out. A deposit, not a withdrawal, a large one, from an unfamiliar source. This wasn't there before, Emily said, flipping back to compare. Where did it come from? I asked. She pointed to the reference line. A business name, one I recognized, but not for a good reason. I sat back slowly. Emily. She looked at me. What? That company. I said carefully. They've been under investigation. Her expression changed instantly. For what financial fraud? I replied. The word landed hard, because now this wasn't just about a dishonest husband. This was something bigger, something dangerous. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. You're saying Daniel is involved in something illegal. I'm saying, I corrected gently, that money connected to something illegal is moving through your joint account. Silence, heavy, cold, because that distinction didn't make it better. What do we do? She asked. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. We document everything, I said. She nodded immediately. I already made copies, she said. Of course she had. And we don't confront him again yet, I added. She frowned slightly. Why not? Because if he's involved in something serious, I said, he'll be prepared this time. She leaned back slowly. Processing. So we just... Wait. No, I said. We get clarity. There's a difference. Waiting is passive. Clarity is intentional. We need to know who that account belongs to, I continued, and where that money is really going. She nodded. I can call the bank. They won't tell you much, I said. Not about another account holder. We need to know who that account belongs to, I continued, and where that money is really going. She nodded. I can call the bank. They won't tell you much, I said. Not about another account holder. Her frustration flickered. Then how do we find out? I paused, because this was the line, the moment where things moved from personal to serious. We may need legal help, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. Lawyers, possibly, I replied, or at least someone who understands financial tracing. She sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. Okay. No hesitation, no resistance, because she understood now. This wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about truth and consequences. Later that afternoon, something happened neither of us expected. Daniel called. Emily stared at her phone for a long moment before answering. I didn't leave the room, but I didn't speak either. I just listened. Hello? She said. A pause. Then, where have you been? Another pause. Her expression shifted, from guarded to something else, something sharper. I don't care if you needed space, she said. You don't disappear like that. I couldn't hear his voice, but I could feel the tension through her responses. No, she said firmly. We're not past this. Another pause, then her grip tightened on the phone. I saw everything she said. Silence, longer this time. Then, no, don't do that, she said, her voice dropping. Don't try to twist this. Her eyes flicked toward me for a second, then back down. I know about the transfers, she said. Another pause, then her expression changed completely. Shock. Real shock. What she whispered. My chest tightened, because that was new. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. She stood up slowly, turning slightly away, as if she needed space to process whatever she was hearing. No, she said. That doesn't make sense. Another pause, longer, heavier. Then she closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not confused, not emotional, certain. Then you need to come back, she said. A beat. Now. She ended the call without waiting for a response. The room was silent. I stood slowly. What did he say? I asked. She didn't answer right away, because whatever she had just heard was still settling. Finally, she looked at me. And what I saw in her eyes wasn't fear anymore. It was realization. He said the account because whatever she had just heard was still settling. Finally, she looked at me. And what I saw in her eyes wasn't fear anymore. It was realization. He said the account isn't his, she said. I frowned. Then whose is it? She swallowed. My name is on it. The words hit like a thunderclap. What I said, she nodded slowly. He said he opened it for me. That didn't make sense. Why would he? I don't know, she interrupted. But he said it's legally under my name. Everything in me went still. Because that changed everything. Emily, I said carefully. If that's true. I know, she whispered. Her voice trembled now. He used me. Yes. That was exactly what it sounded like. He hadn't just hidden something. He had built something using her identity, her trust, her name, and suddenly all those withdrawals, all those deposits weren't just suspicious. They were dangerous for her, not him. When is he coming back? I asked. She looked at the door. Soon. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift inside me. Not concern, not uncertainty, but resolve. Because whatever happened next wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about protecting her from it. And as we stood there, waiting for Daniel to walk back into a situation he could no longer control, I realized something. The story that started at the bank was never about money. It was about power. And now that power was shifting. The sound of the door opening felt louder than it should have, like something final had just begun. Emily and I both turned at the same time. Daniel stepped inside slowly. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look guilty. He looked prepared. And that more than anything made my chest tighten. Because men who think they're still in control walk in like that. Calm, measured, careful. Emily, he said softly. Not me, never me. He didn't even glance in my direction at first, but that was fine, because this wasn't my conversation anymore. This was hers. You said you'd explain, Emily replied. Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. Daniel nodded once. I will. He set his keys down on the table, then finally looked at me. Just for a second, enough to acknowledge, enough to calculate. Then back to Emily. I didn't want it to happen like this, he said. Emily didn't move. Then how did you want it to happen? She asked. No anger, no shouting, just truth. Daniel exhaled slowly. I was trying to protect you. There it was, the oldest excuse in the world. I watched Emily closely, because I wanted to see if that would work on her, if it still had power. It didn't. By using my name, she asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. You don't understand the situation, he said. Emily took a step forward. Then explain it. The room felt tighter, smaller, like everything was closing in around this moment. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I got involved in something. he admitted. I said nothing. Emily said nothing. Because now we were finally getting somewhere. What kind of something? She asked. He hesitated again, and that hesitation told us everything before he even spoke. A business opportunity, he said. Emily's expression didn't change. What kind of business? Daniel's voice dropped. Investment management. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. And the fraud investigation? I asked calmly. His eyes snapped to me, sharp, defensive. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Emily didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on him. I do, she said, and that shifted everything, because now he knew he couldn't control the narrative anymore. You moved money through our account? She continued. You opened something in my name. Daniel's jaw tightened. I had to, he said. Emily blinked. Had to? As if that justified anything. Why? You moved money through our account, she continued. You opened something in my name. Daniel's jaw tightened. I had to, he said. Emily blinked. Had to, as if that justified anything. Why, she asked. This time he didn't hesitate. Because I couldn't use mine. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Because that was the truth. Raw. Ugly. And undeniable. Emily's breath caught slightly. Why not? She asked, even though she already knew. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then finally, because I was already flagged. There it was. The full weight of it. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mistake. A pattern. A history. You were under investigation, Emily said. Not a question, a statement. Daniel looked away. Yes. The room went still. Because that changed everything. Not just what he did, but who he was. How long, she asked. His silence lasted too long. Daniel, she said firmer now. How long before we got married? He admitted. I felt something shift inside me, because this wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This had been there from the beginning. You lied to me, Emily said. Her voice didn't break. That was the most heartbreaking part. It didn't break. I didn't tell you everything, he corrected. She let out a small, empty breath. That's not the same thing, she said. No, he replied quietly. It's worse. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe he understood. But then he said something that erased that entirely. I fixed it, he added. Everything was under control. Emily's expression hardened. No, she said. It wasn't. She stepped closer. You used my name, she said. You put me at risk. Daniel shook his head quickly. I would never let anything happen to you. Emily let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. It already did. Silence, because there was no argument for that. No defense. No justification. What happens now? She asked. And this time, there was no emotion in her voice. Just decision. Daniel hesitated. I can fix it, he said again. Emily shook her head slowly. No. One word, but it carried everything. Everything she had learned. Everything she had realized. Everything she had become. No, she repeated. You don't get to fix this. Daniel's face changed. For the first time, he looked uncertain. What are you saying? He asked. Emily didn't hesitate. I'm saying, I'm done. The words landed clean, clear, final. Daniel stared at her, like he didn't recognize her anymore. Maybe he didn't, because the woman standing in front of him now was not the one he had built lies around. Emily, he started. She raised her hand. No, she said. You've said enough. He looked at me then, as if I had something to do with this. Maybe I did, but not in the way he thought. I trusted you, Emily continued, and you used that. Her voice softened slightly. But I'm not going to carry your consequences. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then finally nodded, slowly, as if something inside him had finally accepted reality. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. I believe that, she said. A pause. Then, but you did it anyway. That was the difference. Intent doesn't erase impact. And finally, there was nothing left to say. Daniel picked up his keys, looked around the room one last time, then walked out. No drama, no shouting, just absence. The door closed quietly behind him, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Emily stood there, still, silent, then slowly. She exhaled, and something shifted. Not relief, not yet, but release. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said softly. I stepped closer. How does it feel? I asked. She thought for a moment, then answered. Like I finally see everything clearly. I nodded. Because that's what truth does. It hurts, but it clarifies. Weeks passed after that. Legal conversations, financial reviews, careful steps forward. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was real. And one evening, as we sat together again, just the two of us, Emily looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You didn't give me money, she said. I smiled slightly. No, you gave me the chance to see the truth, she continued. And that meant more than anything. Because in the end, that was always the point. Not control, not power, but clarity. The kind that changes everything. The kind that saves you from a life built on lies. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what people take from you. It's what they hide. Trust is not just about love. It's about truth, about honesty, about the quiet things people choose not to say. And when someone builds a life beside you while hiding something that could destroy you, that's not protection. That's betrayal. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. Clarity is power. Even when it hurts, even when it breaks something you thought would last forever. Because once you see the truth, you can choose differently. You can protect yourself. You can rebuild. And most importantly, you can stop carrying consequences that were never yours to begin with. If you've ever ignored a feeling, if you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it, if you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, you're not alone, and you're not wrong. Sometimes walking away isn't losing everything. It's finally choosing yourself. So tell me, what would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away the moment you saw the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we need the most are the ones that remind us we're stronger than we think. Sometimes the most painful truths in life are not the ones that break us instantly, but the ones that slowly reveal how deeply we were deceived. We often believe that love means trust without question, that family means safety without doubt. But life has a quiet way of testing those beliefs. What this story reminds us is simple yet powerful love without honesty is not love, it is illusion. And trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can become the very thing that puts us at risk. But here is the deeper truth, discovering that betrayal is not the end of your story. It is the moment your real strength begins. Clarity is a gift even when it arrives wrapped in pain. Because once you see the truth, you are no longer living in confusion. You are no longer controlled by someone else's choices. You are free to decide what you deserve and what you will no longer tolerate. Walking away is never easy. It feels like losing everything you built, everything you believed in. But sometimes, walking away is not losing it, is reclaiming your dignity, your peace, and your future. It is choosing yourself after years of choosing someone else. If this story touched you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where the truth changed everything for you? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories that heal, that empower, and that remind us of our worth, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the right story at the right time can change the way we see our own lives.